Hey, welcome everybody. Sorry I'm late. I did it again. I get so carried away, I forget to push the button to go live. And that's probably why I didn't see anybody showing up on the numbers. Now I see you coming in. All right. So, hey, welcome to the show. I'm your absent-minded host, Vic Sinise. Welcome. We meet every Saturday at 9 a.m. Central Time. If you're watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, then you're going to see us just fine. And if you're on YouTube, hey, hit that subscribe button because we need you as a subscriber. Again, if this is your first time watching us, be sure to check us out on uronurse.com, where you can find out more information about the show and all the different things we have to offer. Plus, our past episodes, all 53 of them. It's also the link to get to UroNurse Plus, the news feature we added, providing some other additional features like shorts. And this one here has really been popular, audio podcasts. You want to listen in your car? This is an audio version of the show, every show. And it's available on all your favorite things like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and Google. Now, hey, if you're not coming to the show through StreamYard, you're probably not getting the newsletter, and you may be not even aware that there is a newsletter, but I have had a newsletter. So every Monday I put out a newsletter. It comes through a company called MailChimp, so it's perfectly safe to be a part of. You just join, and you'll get the newsletter. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe. It's you don't see anybody else. They don't see your email or anything, so really safe to use. Simple to do. Go to uronurse.com, fill out this little form as you see there. I need at least your email address. More information lets me know more stuff about where people are coming from, so that's why it's there. You don't have to put it in, though, to get the newsletter. Then you'll get your newsletter every Monday telling you what this week's show is going to be about, some additional things that you might be interested to know what's going on. I try to forecast some of the future stuff that's coming up on that newsletter. Also, on Friday, you'll get a quick reminder. Hey, guess what? Tomorrow's going to be UroNurse in case you want to catch us live. And then if you are going through StreamYard, you probably already know this, you'll get that little reminder email an hour before the show starts through StreamYard. But you don't get that, I don't think, through any of the other processes. Again, if you're watching this at home and you're part of the online audience and you want to submit a question, go ahead and fill out that box right there for it. So we got a great show this week. I think a really necessary show. I decided to start to go into these skills labs because there's a lot of people new to urology, and there's really not a lot of great places to go. And I think this one's aimed at the new nurses that are in it, and especially our new MAs that are joining, because they're doing a lot of this work that traditionally was done by the nurses. And probably, there's not very little training for RNs and probably no training for MAs in urology. So I think this is a great stepping stone to discuss something. We're going to be talking about how to reprocess equipment. I'm going to tell you that what you're going to hear is going to be a little scary today to find out what's happening, but maybe think about what's going on in your office too. So with that, I do want to go ahead and bring in our great group of experts today. Hey guys, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
All right. So sorry about that delay in the start time, but things happen, right? One of these days, I'm going to remember to hit that button. I get kind of into the music when it starts off with that intro.
So maybe it brought out anxiety, a little bit of anxiety.
That trepidation. It's starting. It's going to be here. Oh, but anyway, we're on live and it's all good. So Lori, let's have you go ahead and introduce yourself. I didn't have a chance to ask you if you had a favorite story, but if you do, share it with us.
All right. Hi, my name is Lori Atkinson, and I'm a certified urology registered nurse. I've been in urology for 25 years now, and I currently work for Northwestern in Geneva and Winfield, Illinois. I'm going to follow up on my little roller skating story from last week. We had a fantastic time. It is absolutely priceless to see doctors on skates. And we're all kind of the doctors and we're all kind of the same age, so it was great. But the best comment came from one of the doctor's wives who was there. And the two doctors were males and they're skating. And she's like, they look like pedophiles. There's all these little kids and there's these two grown-up adult men skating. It was just hilarious. So, but great.
Were they doing that skating move like this?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Back in the day. Oh boy, the strutting and all that stuff. Oh my gosh. It was hilarious, but it was great team building for the crew. And we talked about it for days afterwards. It was fun. Nobody got hurt. Nobody went on workman's comp or anything. I got blisters like no end, but I tried to act like I was 20 years old again, but no, it was a lot of fun.
I actually grew up during the kind of the peak of roller skating when all these rinks were coming up everywhere. And that was our Friday and Saturday night gig when I was a teenager.
I was a floor guard. I met my ex-husband. He was the DJ and I was a floor guard.
Wow. Boogie nights. Yeah. All right, John, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And I'm sure you have a favorite story. You always do.
Oh, I like to hear about how Lori met her ex-husband in a future episode. Hello, everyone. I'm a private practice urologist in Gilbert, Arizona, and my name is down here. I'm doing this to pay it forward like what Vic is doing. And I do this by sharing my experience in the business and clinical aspects of medicine to help benefit my colleagues. And one of the ways that I'm doing this is by creating the Thriving Urology Practice Facebook group, where we are actually live right now. So if you have any suggestions, comments, please feel free to join in. There are about over 2,300 US-based urology practice folks where we collaborate in this group to help improve our practices, and it's all for free. So the story that I have is something that happened yesterday. We're very fortunate to have a large house that has an air conditioning unit in Gilbert, Arizona. Yeah. And in July, we had a record number of days where we exceeded 110 degrees. So to say that it's hot would be an understatement. Well, you can't have a hot house when you have 3 teenage kids living in it. Yesterday, the thermostat to the kids area just went blank. So, of course, I Google online, try to figure out, okay, how do I fix this? It's one of these smart thermostats that went blank. And Ecobee gave us a bunch of suggestions on how to fix this problem. I made sure that there was electricity going to the unit, the AC unit, and things like that. And it turned out that it's most likely the condensate drain that was plugged. So the condensate drain comes from the evaporator that is up in the attic. So I had to go bring up the ladder from the garage to the second story. And then, of course, the attic entry is on a 20-foot ceiling. So I had to fully extend the ladder and then climb up, push open this heavy door, and then I get into the attic. And of course, the switch that turns on the light, it was in the on position. So whomever used it last, the AC people, left a light on and burned out all 3 bulbs. So it was in the dark. I had to find the flashlight, go back up there, and then replace the light bulbs to look at the 3 AC blowers up there and figure out which one is it that went out. So finally, and of course, the one that is bad is way at the end, right where the ceiling or the roof leveled down. So it's a small space, and then I find the culprit, which is a float that was activated. What happens is that when the drain pipe gets plugged up, that float comes up and then it disconnects the AC. So I'm like, yes, I figured it out. Opened up the float, blew some air into it, and it will work for a few minutes and then it would quit. Ultimately, the culprit was the drain plug outside was filled with a little bit of dirt. When I went outside, used one finger, unclogged it, and then I saw a bunch of condensate come out, and that was what solved the problem. So why do I tell this story? The story is important to you for a couple of reasons. Number one, how did I know to look for that condensate line, and how did I know to look for that float switch? Well, we have Google to help us, right? But then you have Google to help you, but if you never take the action to actually try to fix things, it would still be broken. My kids would be roasting, and I would have spent hundreds of dollars to have somebody else fix it.
Yeah.
So just because you have the knowledge doesn't mean that you know how to do it. You actually have to take the action to do it. And the more of the basic skills that you learn, when you're faced with a novel situation, I never fixed a condensate line before. I had to know a little bit about electricity to understand how that float switch worked. I had to have a little bit of understanding with plumbing. Well, thankfully, I'm a human plumber, so I have a little bit of understanding of plumbing. You take the skills that you learn from other areas, and then you can apply it to your current situation. And without that the previous exposure, I wouldn't know how to fix this problem. And the second point that I'm bringing to you, why I'm telling this story, is that you want to put yourself in situations where you can learn. And one of the best ways to do so is by doing things like this.
Yeah.
Come on here, be a panelist, and ask Vic. Vic has contact information everywhere. You can go to Uronurse. You can be like Lori, myself, Vic. You can be on stage, if you will, and it doesn't take a lot. We show you how we set up our stage, our equipment here in episode 46 of Uronurse. So look into that. You never know when you be able to surprise yourself and be able to fix things and save hundreds of dollars. Back to you, Vic.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great story. And as John said, I think that one of the things that you probably notice with all of us, because we've been doing this now for a year, we really enjoy it. And we don't do it just because we're, giving back. We are, but we're having a heck of a fun time doing it. So it's really kept the whole program going. So, hey, you're all welcome to join the fun. It's always out there as a possibility for you. So I'm going to save my comments or my stories for my actual presentation, because I've got a few stories that go along with that. I'm going to bring this up here. Oops, I actually had the right slides ready. So here we go. So today, reprocessing of medical equipment is our subject. I'm going to be talking about it. A little background. So back about 40 years ago, Earl Spalding devised a system about how to reprocess equipment by breaking the equipment that we use every day into 3 basic categories. The first category is what he called critical items. So critical items are anything that's at a high risk of becoming contaminated with some kind of infecting organism, and any object that enters sterile tissue or the vascular system. So, right away, you go to surgical instruments, obvious, it's a no-brainer. The recommended sterilization for critical items is heat, and they're not heat sensitive, is to put them in an autoclave, sterilizing them. Now, the second classification was considered semi-critical items. These are contact with mucous membranes and non-intact skin. Well, the urethra is a mucous membrane, so right away, think about our scopes. Cystoscopes are considered semi-critical items. Well, they require high-level disinfection with a liquid disinfectant. And what's the difference between an autoclave and Sidex? Well, an autoclave is designed to be able to kill all organisms. It's sterile, means everything is killed. The high-level disinfections will kill everything. It doesn't kill spores. And so it's not as complete. So it's high level, but not total sterilization. Now, unfortunately, you don't have a choice. You can't do, a cystoscope can't be put in an autoclave. Some of the cystoscopes, the metal rigid ones, are actually autoclavable. I've got some of those in my office, and we do autoclave them. They're a special cycle you have to run, but they work just fine. But the flexible, which is the kind of the grunt of the business, is not able to be done. It needs to be processed. And then there's non-critical items that we have all in our everyday office, such as blood pressure cuffs, stethoscopes, the table that we put patients on. All this stuff is considered non-critical items. They don't come in, they're coming in contact with intact skin and not mucous membranes. And the recycling, reprocessing is much simpler. And I'm going to go through a product that we use for that too. So I'll talk about each of these and how we should treat it. Why did I even get involved in this? Why am I talking about this? Who am I to talk about it? Well, actually, one of the experts. So back in 2012, the AUA was noticing a big uptick in the number of infections post prostate biopsies. They track these type of data, and they said, something's going on here. We need to investigate it and see what's going on, and decided that what we needed to do was form a group to do some research and come up with some recommendations. And out of that, a white paper was born. They contacted the SUNA group, which I'm a part of, and the nurses were tasked with part. The doctors were tasked with part. We worked together and came up with, I think, really a good white paper to tell you how to reprocess equipment. I always hit the wrong button. Big thing is it's got to be evidence-based. That's the key. Now, you'll find out, and we talked about this with other other products out there, like the suprapubic tubes. There isn't always a lot of good evidence out there. So, but when you're doing research, you have evidence-based research. It falls into three categories, either grade A, B, or C. High grade, high quality, well-conducted randomized studies is your best. That's your grade A, versus some of the others, B and C's. You can read those yourself. It also included, and this was important because we put together a group of experts. So expert opinion was allowed. Clinical principle, it's kind of what we describe sometimes as dogma, but what's being done usually in practice. Now, again, the people that were involved in this were all experts in their fields. These are not, people off the street that aren't doing this all the time. It's people that were doing this type of work all the time. So what were the concerns? Well, again, as I said, they noticed this trend of increased hospitalization after prostate biopsy. The other thing they noticed is on cultures out of these patients that were getting septic, that, back in the day, fluoroquinolone was the wonder drug. Everybody was using the fluoroquinolones. I've been around long enough that I remember when they first came out, and Naroxen was the first fluoroquinolone to be introduced to the market. And the rep would come into the office and they'd go, "This drug is never going to have any resistance. It's such a unique molecule." It was the first really new antibiotic classification that had come around. And they said, it's like the perfect drug. And it was, at the time, it really was. Cipro came along, had even better penetration than Naroxen, and it really better penetration in tissue and in market share because they knew how to get out and market the drug. So anyway, it skyrocketed, but everybody started using it for everything, not just the urologist, but everybody, because it worked on respiratory things. So got a lot of use, a lot of overuse. And the other thing is there was no really good evidence-based studies out there to say what we should be doing. Everybody just kind of had their practices that they were following, but it wasn't always that there was good research to back it up. So there was an opening for research to happen. We noticed that we know that it was rectal bacteria that were going in, causing most of the infections. You cannot sterilize a bowel. That's bottom line. And as we said earlier, alluded to, that the overuse of antibiotics was causing resistance. So we needed to look at that. Now, medicine kind of focused on those problems, such as the antibiotic side, bleeding issues that were occurring, because that was the other cause for people to end up in the hospitals, was too much bleeding post-operatively or post-procedurally. We were looked at the reprocessing side. Nursing decided to pick that side. And what I'm going to show you now, I think, it blew my mind when I did it. But the big cause was improper equipment disinfection. I mean, that seems like it should be a no-brainer. But let's go through what's utilized in a prostate biopsy. So you have a transrectal probe, an ultrasound probe, not something you can put in an autoclave. It's heat sensitive, so you couldn't autoclave it, but it should be treated as a something that you can do high level disinfection. Needle biopsy guides, these were reusable. They were designed that way. They're made out of stainless steel, surgical stainless steel, and can be packaged and put in an autoclave to be reprocessed. And this is kind of the arrangement that we use. So you can, again, high level disinfect your probe. Follow the instructions based on every company. They have their own recommendations. You can cover it with a device to protect people against cross-contaminations. Then you put your sterile, which the sterile needle is going to go through, your sterile biopsy guide on over that. I put another condom over that because in the old days, now we don't use these anymore, but that surface where they kind of connected the two wasn't the smoothest, and getting that into somebody's rectum was a little easier by having another condom on it. It really doesn't serve any protection though. And then the needles were all sterile. They were one-time use. You did all your biopsies with them, tossed them. There was no patient-to-patient contamination possibilities. But they did come with a gun that they had to go into, which was reusable. So Although there was no really direct connection between the gun and the patient, I can tell you from doing and being involved with a number of these biopsies that, sometimes there could be some blood that sprays on them, or they can get contaminated. They can be reprocessed though. You can follow the instructions that Bard gives, and they're actually autoclavable, so they can be autoclaved. So here's what we found out when we did some research: is the outbreak was Pseudomonas after transrectal ultrasound biopsies found out by the Georgia Department of Human Resources. And when they looked into it, they found the big problem was a failure to sterilize the needle guide, and they were using tap water to rinse the guide afterwards. So they did this investigation, and they looked at the patients who had been biopsy between 2003 and 2006. Fortunately, they probably weren't doing as many biopsies back then, but 528 patients got tested for HIV, bloodborne diseases, HIV and hepatitis B and C. And thankfully, none came out positive for HIV, but 3%, 16 of them developed positive markers for hepatitis B. Now, just think about that. You go in for a prostate biopsy, trusting that the staff has your health in their hands, and you end up coming out with hepatitis B. That's scary. And what happens? So during an infection control rounds, the nurse happened to observe debris in the lumen of the needle that was used to process the prostate biopsy equipment. The needle guide had been flushed with tap water for cleaning. Then it was soaked in Cidex OPA for 20 minutes for disinfection. Now, by the way, those processes are acceptable. I can tell you that there's evidence out there that says that you can use Cidex to reprocess those. Probably not ideal, but we'll get into that. Here's the problem. The brushes for cleaning the prostate guide were never used. There's a special brush that goes with them. They came separately, which to me, they came with mine, and you can order extras because they do bend and eventually you have to replace them. But they came separately. They never ordered them. Now, this is a biopsy that I had been involved in. This is our guide, and that's the brush going through it. And I'm showing you there, I'll bring it up a little closer for you, what gets pushed out of that lumen. That's a clot filling the entire lumen of the biopsy needle. And that's what was the issue is, no matter what you do, however you're going to reprocess, if it's got that big old clot in there, it's not going to be sterilized. The way all these disinfectants, including autoclaves, work is by exposure to the surfaces. So you have to have a clean surface that it's going to sterilize. You can't sterilize contaminated equipment. Number one. And you can see, I think that shows exactly where the problem was coming in. So the FDA put out this public notice. I think it's more of a slap on the wrist type thing. Hey, important to know that you got to clean these things. I thought it should have been much more strongly worded, but they did come out with some recommendations saying that since a biopsy needle contacts the needle guide, it is considered a critical device and it must be sterilized. And then also remember, you can't achieve sterilization or high-level disinfection unless the assembly is cleaned first. So they kind of put that out there. The FDA actually put out this little flyer that went with kind of a recommendation of how you should be reprocessing this. And I think it was good. They did include, do not rinse the reprocessed device with tap water as it may recontaminate the device. If you're using tap water, you don't know if your source of tap water is, I guess you assume it is because you're drinking it, right? But it's not guaranteed to be sterile, that's for sure. The CDC also got on board, and they put out a 158-page recommendation about reprocessing all different type of medical equipment. And this was done back way in 2008. So they had this out there around when all this stuff happened. And their big thing as far as prostate showed was, again, because the biopsy needle penetrates sterile tissue, it must be sterile. Ideally, I don't like that wording, but ideally the needle guide should be sterilized between uses. So I think what they were looking at was not every office had an autoclave. Now, I don't know a urology office that's worth going to that can't afford a sterilization. An autoclave. They're not cheap, but they're certainly not that expensive. If this is not possible in clinics where the materials are not available, they could then use high-level disinfection. And probably, there's no evidence to prove it, but probably if they used the high-level disinfectant and had cleaned the system and got the clot out of it, they probably would not have had that spread of hepatitis, because Cydex should kill that. So if everything's done properly, it should provide good disinfection. They also put together this little box, but again, they included this alternatively high-level disinfect the probe and needle guide separately following disassembly. Now, this was a sticking point. Nursing said this should be autoclave. We don't even see where high level should be there. Doctor said, wait a second, go show me the evidence. Could I show him the evidence? No, it didn't exist. So good place to probably, if those that want to do research, this would be a good research project to see, is high level disinfection for these good enough? Now, things have changed since this was came out, and I think the equipment's different. So we'll talk about that. That probably solved the whole problem. But anyway, this was our arguing point. They argued that, we have to include this for offices that don't have an autoclave. So that's where the evidence kind of leaked into our recommendations. They also went back and looked at some of the stuff that companies were putting out that made these guides, and they kind of threw the onus on us. You need to look at what your reprocessing recommendations are. They did, number one, say you need to remove it, clean it, use an enzyme detergent product. I'm going to talk about that for those that might not be aware of what those enzyme cleaners are, because they're, I think, almost essential for any good cleaning of instruments. And then a disinfecting product, and they talked about some of these that could be used. So again, this was kind of used for their ammo to say, no, you got to include that. So here's what we came up with. This was the end result of our white paper. It's much longer, and you can certainly go online and look it up. The AUA has since published, I think in 2017, they came up with an updated version of this too. So you can look at either one of those, but they're all both good things to be familiar with. Because prostate biopsy needles have a long, narrow lumen and easily contaminated by blood and feces, and penetrate at the Food and Drug and the CDC both recommended cleaning, then heat sterilization for all reusable prostate biopsy needle guides. Trust me, that came from nursing. We recommended it be bolded and got it through. So that was our little dig at our battle. But again, however, due to comparative effectiveness, we had to admit there was no good evidence to say that the high level disinfectant could not be used. Just putting it out there, folks. When you get involved in these things, it's always a give and take. Everybody's going to fight with their own ammunition, and whoever's got the bigger gun sometimes wins. Rectal transducers, reusable prostate biopsy guns are considered semi-critical, heat-sensitive devices, and may be disinfected using high-level methods. The manufacturer's recommendations for sterilization should be followed, because some of the ultrasound probes have different chemicals that can be used on them and can't be used on them. So you got to make sure you're using what's appropriate for what device you're using. The cleaning should be done with a brush. That probably should have been bold. Properly sized for the lumen of each device being cleaned. Absolutely. All heat-sensitive parts such as ultrasounds, transducers should be cleaned, dried, and placed in high-level disinfectant. Absolutely. Tap water is contraindicated. There was enough research out there to say you shouldn't, because it may recontaminate a reprocessed transducer. So you should be using something along the line of sterile water. That's what we do. We just get a pour bottle of sterile water for that. Single-use needle guides, single-use biopsy needles, and single-use combination biopsy guns and needles should be properly disposed of immediately after the biopsy is completed. Can I get a duh right there? Absolutely. You don't want to, if it's single use, it's single use. Now, I got some other scary news coming up later on in the show. Specific guidelines for refilling the this was kind of an interesting one. So again, not a lot of good evidence out there. Here's probably another place that research should be done. So guidelines about the ultrasound gel bottles. Most places that we kind of pulled and got information from are just filling them from a bigger gallon into the smaller, the squeeze bottles to use. There are sterile single pack sterile ultrasound gels that you can buy. Of course, they're more expensive. We could not find a good evidence at the time of whether the stuff coming, refilling the same bottle was a form of contamination or not. Nobody had any proof of that. Although we did feel that the sterile packets were probably the better way to go. Prevention measures should include staff training. Absolutely. And that sometimes that could be the missing piece. Competency training, hand washing, safe use of reprocessing equipment, according to the CDC, infection control, rounds, audits, blah, blah, blah. So we want to make sure that not only is it being done properly, that we're also protecting the person doing it. So that's what we came up with. Now, I'm going to go into each one of these a little bit more depth. Non-critical devices, we talked about that. That's your stethoscope, your blood pressure cuffs, your tables, etc. Can all just be cleaned with something that's going to kill off most bacteria. It's not high-level disinfection, but we use a product called SaniCloth. They make several of, whoa, in there. Anyway, I've got a little video about how this stuff works.
Your facility has chosen Super SaniCloth germicidal disposable wipes for routine housewide disinfection on high-touch, hard, non-porous surfaces, such as countertops, bed rails, keyboards, carts, and medical equipment. Its 2-minute contact time is proven to be effective against 30 microorganisms, such as bacteria, multi-drug resistant bacteria, TB, bloodborne pathogens, and viruses, including SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Step 1. Prepare the canister or the soft pack. To prepare the canister to dispense the first wipe, find center of wipe roll. Then twist corner of wipe into a point and thread through the hole in the canister lid. The pre-saturated wipes have the correct amount of germicidal solution, saving valuable time. Step 3. Cleaning. Before wiping a surface, determine if there is visible soil present. If you can see dust, dirt, blood, or other organic material, you will need to clean prior to disinfection. This step is required only if visible soil is present. To clean, use the first wipe to remove any visible soil from the surface. Make sure all of the soil is removed, using more wipes if necessary. Step 4. Disinfecting. To disinfect, there must be no visible soil on the surface. Dispense a wipe using the proper procedure in Step 2. Be sure to close the lid. Using the clean wipe, thoroughly wipe the surface, getting into crevices and corners. The highly absorbent material has improved fluid capacity and is both thick and strong. The surface must remain visibly wet for the full 2 minutes. Use additional wipes if needed to ensure continuous 2-minute wet contact time. Once the 2-minute wet contact time is complete, allow the surface to air dry. Step 5. Wipe disposal. Dispose of used wipe in trash or in accordance with your facility's regulations.
Okay, so I kind of cut some of the stuff out so that wasn't too boring. But the big things are if you look at this particular one I've got up here, it shows 5-minute kill time. So each of them has different kill times. There's a 1-minute one that I also have in our office that we use. So look at the bottle, read what its kill time is. And the whole thing is by killing, it means you get the surface wet and let it dry naturally. And it should stay wet for that period of time. So the 1-minute stuff is a lot easier to achieve that with than these other ones. But that's what can be used for all these non-critical devices. It's ideal to reprocess things. I will make one warning. They look like baby wipes, the same kind of dispenser. As a grandpa, I'm used to baby wipes. So make sure you wear gloves. I mean, these things are designed to kill off all this crazy stuff that you see listed there. It's pretty strong, and you don't think you should be getting it on your hands. Just a word of warning. So the next product I'm going to talk about is high-level disinfection. Glutaraldehyde's been around since the 60s and has been recognized since then as a good sterilant to be used to achieve high-level disinfection. This is what most of us use for our cystoscopes. Again, got to stress, it's only going to work if what you're working with is cleaned ahead of time. Now, if you're using glutaraldehyde in your office, OSHA has this. You can go on their website, OSHA.gov, and look for this book. It's called The Best Practices for Safe Use of Glutaraldehyde in Healthcare. It's a great a resource to look at what you need to do to protect yourself. OSHA, people think OSHA is protecting patients. It doesn't. OSHA is your protection. You, the employee who's doing the reprocessing. This is to protect you because this stuff can be dangerous. Some of the big health effects of glutaraldehyde is the vapor, the smell. You can kind of smell it. If you ever worked with it, you'll know it's pretty pungent. But that exposure to that vapor can cause things like occupational induced asthma. Getting it on your hands, you have to wear gloves. It can cause dermatitis. It can cause, just the vapors alone can cause tearing and itchy eyes and runny nose and all that great stuff. So again, proper precautions. You need face coverage, eye coverage, so that if you get splashed, you're not going to get it in your face. Variety of engineering controls should be in place, and local exhaust ventilation is required for this. I'm going to show you the device that we use. It's a game changer, but at the very least, they recommend that the environmental room, whatever room it's in, can exchange the air 10 times. That means all the air in the room has to be able to be exchanged 10 times in an hour. And that has to be documented. Somebody has to do the engineering to figure that out. Very few normal air conditioning units or heating units are doing that. This is a unit, though, you can purchase, and it's called the glutaraldehyde hood. I found it shortly after we switched over to glutaraldehyde, and I'm like, these fumes can't be good for you. So I looked it up right away to find out what we could get. And what it is it's a reverse flow, just like a laminar hood, like you work for chemos and things. It's sucking air in, so you're not getting the vapor coming out. So it's drawing it through, and it puts it through a filter. So this can be run in a room. It filters the glutaraldehyde, and you'll notice the difference immediately if you use one. You will not smell the smell of glutaraldehyde. It just doesn't exist. It does such a good job. They're not super cheap. They're not super expensive, but I don't care. It's if you, most likely your rooms aren't able to control that exposure, you need to get something like this in there. Also, if you're the person who's doing all the reprocessing, you ought to be wearing one of these glutaraldehyde vapor monitors to make sure your exposure isn't too high. So if you're not using a hood and you're using a room that puts you up to, you're hoping has enough exposure time, or, you're getting enough airflow through it. Again, this will tell you. Now, I can tell you that in our particular workplace, I wore the clip thing because I was doing the most processing at that time. And with those hoods, never had any exposure control issues. So they're available. You can get them online through whoever your medical device stuff is coming from, or probably through Amazon now. Personal protective equipment is essential. Gloves, eyewear, gowns, lab coats, aprons, something. So if you were to spill, you don't want to spill glutaraldehyde on your uniform and then you have to walk around all day long with that stuff on your skin, right? So poor practices can obviously contribute to glutaraldehyde exposure. You want to minimize how much this stuff is splashed around and gotten to become vaporized. Always want to transport it with tight-fitting lids. Those systems that I was showing you, the filters, they still require a cover over the Sidex so that it's not just leaching all that vapor into the air, because you'll overcome even the ability of the filter to filter it. It's just for that initial exposure when you open it up. It's got usually a switch. As you open the lid, it goes to a high-speed fan, and then when you close it, it goes to a low-speed fan, but it's always filtering the air. If you're using it, you got to eventually change it. That's the other thing that's important. Make sure you always notice whether it's still good or not. But use this product called Glutout. It's a neutralizer. It will convert it to something that's essentially safe, so you can dump it down the drain, and you don't have to worry about getting exposed to the fumes. So you should have all these products if you're working with glutaraldehyde. So as I said, minimizing splashing, etc., are important. Ensuring the ventilation, cleaning up any spills immediately. Also, if you're using glutaraldehyde, I recommend you get this thing called a spill kit. If you spill this on the floor, worst case scenario, and it happened once in our office. I mean, talk about the amount of vapor that'll get out. So immediately it's got a a big bottle of that glute out to neutralize it, so it's going to work fast. The person doing it has a respirator that they can wear to protect themselves so they're not breathing the fumes in while they're cleaning up the spill. It's got soaking pads and all sorts of everything you would need. This emergency spill kit should be like right next to the glutaraldehyde and able to be used right away. There's other products out there like OPA. Again, are they safer? They still require the same amount of air ventilation. OPA actually has a higher risk for dermatitis, so it's harder on the skin. But again, you should be wearing gloves. This is kind of a comparison. Glutaraldehyde has a pungent odor. Soak times are 20 to 45 minutes to have. So read it, see what yours is, because you want to make sure that you're getting enough time. And also temperatures is a particularly important thing. If it's a cold room, it's not going to work as fast as a normal temperature room. OSHA's guide limits are 0.2 parts per million as an exposure rate. So that's what that little badge will tell you. The OPA is mostly odorless. So it's kind of nice in that it doesn't smell so bad, but it's still just as dangerous to inhale the fumes. So you got to make sure that you, again, have a ventilation system. That same ventilation system will work for OPA stuff. It's faster, 12 minutes disinfection time. I haven't really worked with hydrogen peroxide, but again, it's the same thing. It's less hard on the lungs, I guess, because it only needs 6 air exchanges. It works faster and at cooler temperatures. So if you're using any of these things, read the instructions. That's the most important take home. The other part is make sure that you're cleaning these properly. Now, if you're doing a cystoscope, it's got a long channel in it. They make a brush to clean the cystoscope. You've got to use that brush. You've got to squirt the solution into that channel. You can't just put it in the solution and hope that it gets into the channel. You got to flush it. Probably, I usually do about 3 times to make sure enough solution's gotten through there. Also, that includes flushing it out of the channel when you're reprocessing it to get the solution off of it. All surgical instruments are dangerous until they've been sterilized. So if you're the one reprocessing them, you're going to be cleaning them. Make sure you take care that you don't get stuck, scrape, scratch, cut from any of those instruments. So this is just kind of a little guideline from use. Thorough cleaning is the first thing you want to do after you've used or starting to reprocess it, and then you decide disinfectant or sterilization. Enzymatic cleaners, if you haven't used these, I highly recommend you get these. They're an in-between step. The enzymes are designed to break down blood. So again, I was involved in reprocessing equipment most of my career. And sometimes the vasectomies that we did in the office were a perfect example. That would be an instrument that could have a little bit more blood on it than maybe, probably than a cystoscope certainly would have. But anyway, you take it from the patient to the enzyme and let it soak. Follow the instructions for whatever agent you're using. What'll happen is most of the blood is just going to come right off of it by the enzyme. It'll clean it itself. If you have an ultrasonic, it's even better, but it still requires scrubbing. Those little teeth on the hemostat have to be free of debris. Even though you're autoclaving them, it still has to be clean of debris. So then you have to rinse them and then you reprocess them, whichever way you're going to process them. But the enzyme is a good step for making sure that the equipment is staying nice and clean. It breaks down some of the lubricants and things that are used, like the gels and stuff, the lubes that we put on. It's really a great product. So if you're not using it, I recommend it. Then if you've got something that can withstand heat and you need to sterilize it, autoclave is the best thing to use. Autoclaves have been around forever, I think. Autoclaves use 3 things to sterilize. They use time, temperature, and pressure. So if you ever had a pressure cooker in your house, you know that you can cook vegetables a lot faster in a pressure cooker, because when you pressurize steam, it has more energy. So it has more ability to soften up the vegetables. It also can kill bacterial and viruses and things a lot easier by having it under pressure. I do have a little information here on using a autoclave. After you've cleaned your instruments and rinsed them off, you put them in one of these packs after they're dry, of course. You should always take any instruments that have teeth and make sure that they're open so that they get full exposure. Label it. This is autoclave tape and autoclave wrappings. You can get those. Put the date that you've sterilized it so you know how long it's been since it's been last sterilized. You don't want to take something that's been, sterilized 2 years ago and use it. You want to probably reprocess it. Anyway, that tape also turns black to indicate that it's reached the proper temperature. So with, as I said, you need time, temperature, and pressure. So the tape will at least let you know that it hit the right temperature. Now, this is what we use. Sterilization pouches. These are great. They come in all different sizes. You can put single instruments or whole packages of instruments in it. And the way they have an indicator on them also that turns brown when you expose it to the right temperature. I'll tell you right now, I always put the tape on it myself just because it's so big and you can see it a lot easier. I know for sure it's been processed at a glance. So you want to make sure, because you could run a cycle and the autoclave might not have worked. So it wouldn't have changed the colors. And now you can see that you just kind of seal that on the bottom there. And this thing, so once it's sealed and you've run it, I mean, it's really great. You can handle it, not have to worry so much about it getting contaminated. And you peel it open to put it down and drop it on a field. She's showing here sterile water. In an autoclave, you got distilled water. You have to use distilled water in an autoclave because the minerals in normal water will potentially clog up your autoclave. So you want to keep the autoclave running. There's some cleaning directions that goes with autoclaves too. You have to run cycles to clean them just to help them stay running. Now, here's always a question. Do you put them in with the plastic side up or down? I always hear that from new employees, and it's plastic side up. And the reason for that is the steam vapor, you don't want it to, if it was upside down with the plastic down, it could, condense to water vapor, and then you got, water in there, which could possibly become contaminated. So you want it up so that as it dries out, it comes out dry. You don't have water condensate building up. And that's another indicator that she's putting in there as a strip to indicate the temperature was reached properly. So that's a little follow-up on that. All right. Get back to this. But I will warn you that steam is hot. So that thing pops open. Some people are tempted to go in there and grab the instruments. Make sure you're grabbing, you let them finish their whole cool down cycle because you can get burns. So the take home on autoclave is most of the new autoclaves are all automated. You just push a button, they run their cycles. So it's just the preparation part, and then you've got a nice sterile instrument. Now, one of the other things I will say, with no matter what you're using, you've got to make sure it's working, because you can't just assume that it's working. So there's products like Sidex test strips and Sidex OPH test strips. These tell you whether the Sidex is still good or not. That thing on the top is an indicator. You can put it in there. There's indicators that'll tell you temperature, indicators that'll tell you it reached the proper pressure. And then on the right side is a biological. You should be doing biological testing on your autoclaves to make sure it's killing like it should. So one of the goes into the autoclave, the other one stays out. You mail the two into the company and they run them to see whether it killed what contaminant, whatever organism is in there. And they'll send you this nice little printout that your autoclave passed. Comes in handy because if somebody ever, says, "Hey, I got an infection from your office," and ask for proof that your equipment is working, you should have these pages here to show, that all this processing was done and that your autoclave was working. Now, I was saying that things have changed since when I did this, and the biggest change has been disposables. So we no longer use the gun and needle; it's the gun and needle together. I think BARD has kind of pushed almost that. They used to have a program where they would repair the guns for free. They got rid of that. I don't even know if you can still buy the guns, quite frankly. They kind of fixed the pricing so that it really works out that the needle and gun itself is probably about the same cost as buying the needle separately and then paying the cost of upkeep of one of those guns. And then the needle guides, the same thing. Those things are disposable now. They're much smoother, so you don't really have to add that second condom. But it's one-time use, throw it away. So you get rid of that problem. So disposables have solved a lot of our problems. However, before doing this talk, I did do a little research. And here's some headlines I found. Doctor accused of reusing needle guides leaves patients angry. Angry? It can be more than angry. Clinic was accused of reusing syringes and sued. Contaminated instruments used during prostate biopsy, suit claims. And then this one, second doctor tells medical board he reused needle guides in biopsies. And you can see here, it clearly says it's single use to throw it away. So, even when you have all the right equipment that we can utilize, you just never know what what's happening in some of these offices, and we trust people. So in conclusion, before I get any questions here, all instruments before they're processed are dangerous. Be careful. Make sure that you do good, thorough cleaning. They should be clean. The enzymes, I highly recommend. That's why I put that bottle up there. If it's got an orifice, it's got a brush that's supposed to fit it. Make sure you get the proper brush so you're cleaning out all those holes. Again, protect yourself. Can't stress that enough. Your company owes you the right, and OSHA guarantees it, that you're safe. So if you don't have safe practices, whip that thing out and show it to them. Make sure that they're providing for your safety. And I don't know about you, but I know that I took the Hippocratic oath that I would do no harm to patients. So I'm hoping that everybody that I see as a patient is following those same rules, because if they're not following those rules, they may be seeing this guy next. So, or worse, getting harmed by the procedures. So with that, I'm going to bring up my experts here. Lori, can you do the questions? Any questions that we have coming in from the audience?
Yep. So far, I do not see any questions. We have a comment from Susie Swain that everything in the prostate biopsy they do is disposable except for the probe.
Yes, that's a good point. Thanks, Susie, for
I do have a couple of comments, actually.
Sure.
I mean, at Northwestern, we are very, very lucky that we have some really high-tech equipment for our high-level disinfection. We have actually what's called the Medivator Advantage, which is, we call it the Beast because it's so big. But prior to our, when we're cleaning our scopes, these are the cystoscopes. We have a scope buddy that actually has connectors to it. We still have to brush it and wipe it off, but it's literally putting, the enzymatic cleaner through it, the water through it. Then we put it in the Medivator, and the Medivator has the level disinfectant. But it's also important. We also have a cystoscope dryer, because it's really important to make sure that your instruments and your cystoscopes and everything dry out completely. Because if you have water settling in those channels, that's not a good thing. The other comment I wanted to make was that when you're using the autoclave, that you should not have your instruments on top of each other. They need to be out where they're like a single layer.
Right.
One of the things that was interesting, because we actually have an infectious disease team that comes in once a year and makes sure that we are doing everything appropriately. And it is strict, which is great. It really is. One of the things that shocked me, though, that I learned when we autoclave stuff, it is and high-level disinfect. And some of the high-level disinfectants, infected stuff, we put in pouches and stuff. It doesn't go bad until you open it, no matter how long it is. I mean, I personally would think that you'd want to re-sterilize it after a year or two, but they're saying no, it is sterile until you open that package, which is really pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. My concern is it's been stored for a year. Do you know what's happened in between?
And the bag turns kind of yellow, and it's kind of gross if you think. And then you had talked about the biological indicators and sending them out. There's actually something called an A test, and we have actually the unit in our office. Mm-hmm. And those, you don't need to send the biological indicators out. You do them yourself. They're time consuming, but that you can do them yourself. Yeah. Let's see. I do Barbara Rose with flexible cystoscopes. The light cord is separate. Does the light cord need autoclaving, or can you wipe it down with the Santa wipes between cases?
So I don't think you can autoclave the light cords.
No, we wipe them off. We do wipe them off.
I would agree. I think as long as when you're wiping them off, you're using something like a Santa cloth, like you mentioned, and it gets the exposure time. You can't wipe it and then dry it because it's not getting the time. Let it sit on there. But according to everything I read on it, it should be fine.
Right.
John, you have any comments while we're waiting to see?
Well, I think the main thing is that anytime that the product says it's single use, you should not reuse the product. And one of the headlines that you posted up was a Las Vegas urologist, Nevada urologist, who reused biopsy needle guides, and he was sent to 4 years in prison and probably a litany of other lawsuits pending.
Yeah.
And he lost his appeal in 2016, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see how anybody could justify it. That's for sure. I mean, it was done for financial reasons.
And the guide, apparently the guide was $18. It's only $18.
Yeah. It's just crazy.
Barbara wanted to know where we could find that in writing, where you could just I think she means to wipe down the
light cord. Yeah. So I think what you have to do is I don't know that you're going to find a research product or statement that says that, that's adequate. What you could do is it certainly would come under the Spalding semi-critical, so that it qualifies under that. And then you can utilize the instruction pack from your Sani product, showing that it provides semi-critical cleaning. So those are your two things that you can use to prove that you're properly sterilizing it. Now, the other option then, since if you want to go to the next level and kick it up, would be to do a high-level disinfection, which would be putting it in the Sidex. But you have to make sure that it's safe. Check with the manufacturer that produces that cord, because those light fibers sometimes, if they are exposed, could possibly, I guess, be an issue. I don't know that for a fact, but I would check with the manufacturer to be sure.
I mentioned it in the comments, but IFU, instructions for use from the manufacturer, may give you some guidance on how to clean the particular product.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I think this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Again, these skills units, if you want to send anything to me go through our website, use the comments or the contact us and let me know what you thought of it. Or right now, if you want to throw something in the comments, I do read these comments as they come up later on, just to see what your thoughts are. But I think that this is not the only subject on this. As Lori said, there's some other devices out there. Maybe Lori might even want to give a talk about the ones they're using at her place that are more sophisticated. I'm trying to use what stuff I think the general offices are probably providing because of the cost factors. But I know the bigger, surgery centers and things that have all these automated systems are great. I didn't even come into Stericycle because I don't know it myself. But if somebody out there is familiar with Stericycle and like to talk about it, there's a lot out there that we can discuss as a group. And I think it's important because, number one, we want to make sure that the folks out there doing it are protecting the patients. That's our number one goal. We want to protect the patients. Our number two goal is to protect you, the end users, and make sure that you're not getting sick from what you're doing. So both things are very important. And then probably the third one is we all want to stay out of jail and out of court. So best to do the right thing. All right. Well, we actually have hit our 10 o'clock hour, so I'm going to wrap things up here. Little plug for next week. We have a talk on Optilume. So we've had a lot of different forms of treatment for BPH. This is another new one that's come out, another new treatment option for BPH. So we're looking forward to that. It's a balloon system with a medication to keep it from restricting down or whatever. I'll let the expert tell us about that, but we have an expert coming in next week on that. In the meantime, hey, we still got some summer left. Enjoy it. It's looking like another fun summer coming to an end, huh? So it's been always a pleasure to have my great staff here, experts with me, and we'll see you all next week on UroNurse.
See you next
Thanks,
week.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.